When your own father calls you worthless and gives your job to someone else, what do you even do? Most people would walk away, but me? I decided to make him choke on his own words. Stick with me while I share my story, and if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. My name's Lyra Bennett, and for years, I worked side by side with my dad, Tom Bennett, in our family construction business. After my mom passed, I threw myself into the work. I handled clients, managed projects, and ran the books while Dad stayed out on job sites. I thought we were a team. I thought I was making him proud. But no matter how much I did, he never said good job. Not once. Everything I achieved was brushed off like dust on a shelf. He saved his praise for my younger brother, Evan, who showed up late, spent most of his time on his phone, and still managed to be Dad's golden boy. It didn't make sense. Evan barely lifted a finger, yet Dad bragged about him to every supplier and client. My son's gonna take this company to the next level, he'd say. I'd stand there, smiling through the sting, pretending it didn't bother me. But it did. It ate at me quietly every single day. Then came the day that broke everything. I'd been working on a deal with one of our biggest clients for weeks. A new housing project that could have doubled our company's income. I stayed late every night drafting estimates, double-checking costs, trying to make everything perfect. The morning the deal was supposed to close, Dad called me into the office. His face was hard cold. Evan sat in my chair, arms crossed, wearing that smug little grin he always wore when he'd done something wrong, but knew he'd get away with it. Dad didn't waste time. Lyra, he said, I think it's time we make some changes. Evan's gonna handle operations from now on. You can take some time off. At first, I thought I misheard him. Time off. Dad, I've been running operations for 3 years. He didn't look at me. Evan's got fresh ideas. You've done what you can, but this isn't really your world. I felt my throat tighten. My world? I've built this with you. I've handled every client, every contract. You're giving my job away? That's when he looked up. His eyes were full of something sharp, something that cut deeper than any words I'd ever heard. You've always been a good helper, Lyra, but you're not a leader. You don't understand business. You're just a worthless girl trying to play boss. The word worthless hit like a slap. My chest burned, but I didn't cry. Not in front of him. I just nodded, gathered my things, and walked out. Outside, the air was heavy with dust and sunlight. I stood by my car, shaking, my dad's words still echoing in my head. Worthless. Maybe he believed that. But in that moment, I decided something he didn't expect. I'd prove him wrong. I'd build something stronger than he ever imagined. And one day he'd see it. The first few weeks after Dad fired me were the hardest of my life. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw him sitting behind that desk, calling me worthless. The word stuck in my head like a nail. I tried to distract myself, but the silence at home was unbearable. My phone barely rang. The guys from the company stopped calling. Maybe Dad told them not to. The world I'd helped build disappeared overnight, and I was left standing in the wreckage. I sat at my kitchen table surrounded by old invoices, blueprints, and unpaid bills. My savings were small, barely enough to cover rent for a couple of months. For the first time, I wondered if maybe he was right. Maybe I really wasn't built for this world. But every time that thought crossed my mind, another voice whispered back, "You made that company run. You know it better than anyone." One night, my friend Marta stopped by with a bag of takeout. She had worked for Dad's company too until he let her go the year before. She looked at me with pity. "You gotta move on, Lyra," she said gently. "He's not worth it." I nodded, but inside I knew I couldn't just move on. He hadn't just taken my job, he'd erased my years of work. The anger burned under my skin like a steady flame. That night, I pulled out an old photo of the first day I'd joined Dad's company. I was 18, fresh out of high school, still wearing my mother's bracelet. Dad had smiled that day, proud and hopeful. I'd learned everything from him, how to talk to clients, how to read blueprints, how to bid jobs. But by the time I was 27, I knew more than he did about running that business. Every client, every supplier, every contractor, I knew them all personally. They trusted me. They came to me when something went wrong. I thought about all those years, the late nights, the long drives, the days spent under the sun on half-built sites. It wasn't nothing. It was experience, skill, and grit, things no one could take from me. Slowly, an idea began to form, quiet at first but growing stronger each day. If Dad thought I didn't belong in his world, I'd build my own. I'd start from scratch. I'd prove I could do it without his name on the sign. I took out a notebook and started writing. Names of clients who might still trust me, suppliers who owed me favors, old workers who'd been treated unfairly. Step by step, a plan began to form. It didn't feel like revenge, not yet. It felt like survival. I needed a name, something that represented strength and resilience. My eyes landed on a vine crawling up the side of my tiny apartment window. It was thin but tough, wrapping around the bricks no matter how the wind blew. That was it. Iron vine contracting. The name made my heart steady for the first time in weeks. I didn't know how I'd fund it or where I'd start, but I knew this much: I'd rise again. And next time, no one would ever call me worthless. The office I found wasn't much. A narrow room above a mechanic's shop that smelled of oil and burnt rubber. The walls were cracked, and the window stuck halfway open, but the rent was cheap, and that was all I could afford. I dragged in a used desk, a second-hand chair, and an old coffee pot that sputtered more than it brewed. It wasn't much, but it was mine. With what little savings I had left, I bought basic tools. Nothing fancy, just enough to get started. A few drills, a saw, a ladder, and a stack of hard hats that still smelled like the store shelf. Each purchase felt like a gamble. I was one bad week away from empty pockets, but backing down wasn't an option anymore. My first step was reaching out to the people my father had pushed away. I made calls from that tiny office until my voice went hoarse. Most didn't answer. Some hung up as soon as they heard my name, but a few listened. They remembered the times I'd fixed mistakes my father ignored, or the late nights I'd stayed to make sure their projects were done right. Slowly, one by one, they started returning my calls. Marta joined me first. She didn't even hesitate when I told her what I was doing. "You need someone who can run the numbers and keep you from sleeping at your desk," she said with a grin, setting her coffee on my empty file cabinet. A week later, Cole, one of the best foremen we ever had, showed up too. He'd quit Dad's company after being blamed for a project delay that wasn't his fault. "He said I didn't have discipline," Cole muttered, rolling his eye. "Guess I'll take my undisciplined self somewhere it matters." The three of us worked out of that cramped space, surrounded by dust and noise from the shop below. Days bled into nights. We took whatever jobs we could find: home repairs, fence installations, small renovations. Nothing glamorous, just enough to keep the lights on. Some nights, the power flickered, leaving us to work by flashlight. We joked that Iron Vine contracting was built on caffeine, stubbornness, and cheap batteries. There were times I wanted to give up, but each morning, I reminded myself why I started. Every nail we hammered, every wall we fixed, was one step away from the shadow my father cast. Then something started to change. The clients we helped began recommending us to others. One woman told her neighbors about how fair we were with pricing. A contractor said we cleaned up after jobs better than anyone else in town. Slowly, our name began to spread. Not loudly, but steadily, like a quiet rumor that refused to die. By the end of the first few months, the phone started ringing more often. It wasn't success yet, but it was movement, real, honest progress. Standing in that tiny office, watching Marta balance invoices and Cole load the truck, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Iron Vine was alive. The call came on a gray Tuesday morning while I was sorting through invoices. The voice on the other end was familiar: Dean Walker, a developer who used to hire my father's company years ago. I hadn't spoken to him since I left. His tone was cautious at first, but curious. "Heard you've got your own thing going now," he said. "Iron Vine, right?" My pulse jumped. "That's right," I answered, trying to sound calm. He paused. "Your dad told me you'd never last 6 months. Think you can prove him wrong." The words lit something in me. I agreed to meet him the next day. The project he offered was big, a full renovation of an old commercial building downtown. It was more than we'd ever handled, but if we pulled it off, it could put Iron Vine on the map. I spent that night at the office, running numbers, sketching plans, checking every cost twice. Marta stayed late too, balancing the budget while Cole inspected the site layout. We couldn't afford mistakes. When I finally signed the contract, I felt the weight of the risk sitting squarely on my shoulders. From the first day on site, we worked like a crew possessed. The building was a wreck: cracked floors, leaky pipes, rotted beams. Every hour mattered, and every problem tested our limits. Cole managed the crew with a steady hand, keeping morale up even when supplies ran late or machinery failed. Marta handled vendors and schedules with military precision. I was everywhere, hauling materials, checking measurements, smoothing out details that others overlooked. The workers respected that I got my hands dirty with them. They stopped calling me boss and started calling me Lyra. Weeks blurred together in noise and dust. We worked through storms, late nights, even weekends. I ate most of my meals standing, with a hammer still in hand. But when we replaced the final pane of glass on the top floor, I stepped back and saw something that took my breath away. The building looked alive again. Dean showed up the next morning in his suit, sunglasses perched on his head. He walked through the place slowly, touching the polished rails, the new walls, the bright fixtures. When he turned to me, there was something different in his expression. "Under budget. 2 weeks early," he said. "Your dad said you didn't understand business." Looks like he was wrong. I didn't reply. I just smiled, feeling something solid settle inside me. Not pride exactly, but peace. When Dean paid the final invoice, he shook my hand firmly. "You've got something real here, Lear. Keep at it." Word spread faster than I expected. Clients who once avoided my calls started asking if Iron Vine was taking new projects. The local suppliers began treating us with new respect. For the first time, I had to turn down small jobs just to keep up. Our tiny crew grew. 2 more carpenters, another electrician. The office that once felt too big for us suddenly felt too small. The phones rang, the trucks rolled, and the sign out front, Iron Vine Contracting, shone a little brighter each morning. We weren't just surviving anymore. We were building something real. The first sign that things were shifting came quietly. One of Dad's longtime clients, a hardware supplier named Milton, called to ask if Iron Vine could take over a warehouse expansion that Bennett Construction had delayed twice. I didn't gloat or ask why. I just said yes and got to work. Then another call came. And another. By midsummer, half the contracts that used to have my father's logo on them were now under Iron Vine's name. At first, I tried not to think about what that meant for him. Business was business, and I wasn't stealing anything. I was simply doing what he refused to let me do before. But in a town like ours, news traveled fast. People talked. Word reached him before long. A week later, I heard from Marta that he'd been bad-mouthing me at the supply yard, saying I'd stolen his clients and poached his workers. I didn't respond. I didn't even let her finish the story. There was no point in defending myself against a man who never believed I could stand on my own. Then one evening, after finishing a site visit, I stopped by Dale's Diner, the only place in town that still served coffee past 8. I had barely sat down when Evan walked in. He looked different, thinner, tired, and more nervous than I remembered. He slid into the booth across from me without asking. "You think this is funny?" he said, his voice sharp but shaky. "You're ruining the family." I stared at him for a moment. "I'm running a business, Evan. That's all. Dad says you're taking everything we built." I leaned back, keeping my voice steady. You barely showed up when I worked there. I'm not taking anything. I'm just doing the job I was born to do, the one Dad said I couldn't." He didn't have an answer for that. He just looked away, muttered something under his breath, and left. I watched him go, feeling a mix of anger and pity. For all his talk, he was just another part of my father's shadow. That night, as I locked up the office, the street outside was empty except for a few passing cars. The Iron Vine sign above the door glowed softly in the dark, the green letters steady against the black sky. I turned off the lights inside, ready to leave, when headlights swept across the window. A truck slowed in front of the building, Dad's truck. Even in the dim light, I recognized the dented fender and the familiar outline behind the wheel. He didn't get out. He just sat there for a long minute, staring up at the sign, engine idling. I stood by the door, hidden behind the blinds, heart thudding. I wondered what he was thinking. Was it anger? Shame? Regret? I'd never know, because after a few moments, the truck pulled away, tires crunching softly over the gravel. When the sound faded, I stepped outside. The air was cool, the night still. The sign above me hummed quietly, casting a faint green glow over the pavement. I looked up at it and whispered, almost to myself, "You see it now, don't you, Dad?" Then I locked the door and went home. Trouble began creeping in slowly, like a leak you don't notice until the floor's already wet. First, a few clients called to confirm strange things. Whispers that Iron Vine was behind schedule, that we used cheap materials, that I'd been cutting corners. None of it was true. Still, it rattled me. When I asked who told them, they hesitated, then muttered the same name every time, Tom Bennett. Next came the suppliers. Orders that usually took a day to process suddenly got lost. Phone calls went unanswered, deliveries delayed without reason. One supplier I'd known for years finally admitted that Dad had been calling around, warning people not to work with me. He told them I was unstable, that my business would collapse any day. Marta caught me pacing one afternoon, hands shaking from frustration. "They're trying to choke us out," I said. "Cut us off before we grow." She just crossed her arms and said, "Then we'll build our own ladder. Let them pull the rope. We'll climb higher." Her calmness grounded me, but I could feel the pressure building behind my ribs. Every obstacle felt like another test, one my father was sure I'd fail. Then came the night that changed everything. It was past midnight when my phone buzzed. Cole's voice came through, breathless. "The warehouse, someone broke in." By the time I got there, flashing red lights from a tow truck nearby cut across the lot. The door had been forced open, and inside, chaos waited. Toolboxes dumped out, shelves overturned, half our equipment gone. One wall looked like someone had taken a hammer to it just to leave a mark. Cole swore under his breath. They knew what they were after. They didn't touch the old junk, just the new stuff we ordered last week. I didn't have to ask who might have done it. The pattern was too clear. Still, I couldn't prove anything, and the idea of calling the police made my stomach twist. It would drag everything into the open, turn business into war. So I made a choice, no reports, no drama. Just work. The next morning, I was back at the office before sunrise, making a list of what needed replacing. Cole tried to argue. Marta looked at me like I'd lost my mind. Lyra, you can't just ignore this, she said. I didn't look up from the list. If I stop now, they win. Marta sighed and leaned against the wall. You don't fight fire with tears, you fight it with results. That line stuck with me. From that day on, I worked harder than ever. We borrowed tools, fixed what was broken, and refused to miss a single deadline. Every project we completed felt like a small victory carved out of chaos. Still, something inside me hardened. I told myself it wasn't about revenge, but the anger simmered beneath the surface, steady, silent, waiting. Dad wanted me to burn out. Instead, he was the one feeding the fire that would make me unstoppable. The envelope arrived on a windy morning, tucked beneath a stack of routine mail. The logo on it made my breath catch. The city's public works department. Inside was an invitation to bid for a new bridge project, the biggest contract our town had seen in years. It wasn't just another job. It was a multi-million-dollar project that could shape Ironvine's future. And one line on the document made my pulse quicken. Bennett Construction was listed among the bidders. For a long minute, I just stared at the paper. It felt like the universe had drawn a line in the dirt between me and my father. Whoever won this would define which name, Bennett or Ironvine, carried real weight in this town. I gathered Marta and Cole in the office that afternoon. The excitement on their faces mirrored mine, though beneath it, I saw the same edge of nerves. If we land this, Marta said softly, we'll be untouchable. Cole nodded. And if we don't? I met his eyes. Then we'll still make sure they know we belong in the same room. The pre-bid meeting was held in a municipal hall filled with local builders, suppliers, and city officials. When I walked in, the room went quiet for a heartbeat. My father stood near the front, surrounded by familiar faces from his company. Evan leaned against the wall beside him, arms crossed, smirking. Tom turned when he saw me, a thin smile curling on his face. Well, if it isn't Ironvine herself, he said loud enough for everyone to hear. You think a little girl can build a bridge? A few people chuckled, uncomfortable, but too afraid to show it. My stomach twisted, but I didn't let it show. I straightened my shoulders and looked him dead in the eye. You'll find out who built the stronger one, I said evenly. The room went still. He looked away first. After the meeting, I walked out into the sunlight feeling something fierce and unshakable rise inside me. The bid was due in 2 weeks. 2 weeks to prove that Ironvine wasn't just surviving, it was competing. Back at the office, we went into overdrive. Blueprints covered every inch of the walls. Marta ran numbers like her life depended on it, hunting for every cost-saving detail. Cole spent his nights drafting logistics, calculating manpower, materials, and schedules down to the hour. I lived on coffee and adrenaline. Every decision mattered. The design had to be strong, efficient, and cheaper without cutting quality. We reviewed every section again and again until the pages were covered in notes and fingerprints. There were moments I doubted we could pull it off. The scale was massive, the stakes higher than anything we'd faced. But then I'd think of Dad's voice in that hall, the way the words "little girl" rolled off his tongue like a curse. That was enough to keep me awake long after the others went home. The night before submission, the final proposal sat printed and bound on the table. I ran my hand over the cover, Ironvine Contracting, North River Bridge Project. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was chasing redemption. I was claiming something that had always been mine. The announcement came early on a Friday morning. I was pouring coffee when Marta burst through the door, her face pale, eyes wide. She didn't speak. She just handed me her phone. On the screen was a message from the city's project board. My heart pounded as I read the first line. Awarded to Ironvine Contracting. For a second, everything went still. Then the room erupted. Marta screamed, Cole slammed his fist on the table, and the whole crew cheered so loud the mechanic downstairs shouted up at us to keep it down. I couldn't move. I just stood there, staring at the words, barely believing them. Against every prediction, every whisper that said we were too small, too new, too inexperienced, we'd done it. We'd won the bridge contract. I finally let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. My hands trembled as I read the email again, just to make sure it was real. Marta threw her arms around me, laughing and crying at the same time. Cole popped open a bottle of cheap sparkling cider we'd been saving for someday. It sprayed across the floor, but no one cared. News spread fast. Within hours, suppliers, city officials, even other contractors were calling with congratulations. But the biggest ripple hit my father's side of town. Bennett Construction had lost its biggest client, the one deal that had been keeping the company afloat. By afternoon, people were talking. At the diner, at the supply yard, even outside the hardware store, everyone had an opinion. Some called it poetic justice. Others said it was about time the old guard made room for someone new. I didn't join in the gossip. I stayed in the office long after everyone else left, the room still echoing with laughter and celebration. The sky outside was dark by the time my phone rang. I didn't recognize the number, but I knew the voice the second I heard it. Lyra. My father. For a moment, neither of us spoke. All I could hear was his breathing, uneven and heavy. The silence stretched until it felt like it filled the whole room. Then quietly he said, "You stole my life." I closed my eyes. The words didn't sting the way they used to. "No, Dad," I said softly. "You threw it away." There was a pause, long enough that I thought he might say something else. But he didn't. The line went dead. I set the phone down and looked out the window at the dark street below. The Iron Vine sign glowed faintly in the reflection, green letters steady against the glass. In the distance, I could hear the hum of machinery from the mechanic's shop and the faint echo of traffic on the highway. Life kept moving. The world didn't stop for victories or losses, it just turned. I stood there until the coffee went cold, my hands still resting on the edge of the desk. For the first time, I didn't feel the need to prove anything. The noise, the anger, the competition, all of it faded into quiet. Iron Vine had won, and that was enough. The collapse of Bennett Construction didn't happen overnight. It crumbled piece by piece, like an old wall losing its bricks one at a time. First, their suppliers stopped extending credit. Then the remaining clients pulled their contracts, unwilling to gamble on a company that kept missing deadlines. Before long, the trucks stopped running, the phones went quiet, and the sign out front started to peel under the sun. I didn't watch it happen, but I heard enough through the grapevine. People talked, they always did. Some said Dad spent his days sitting in his truck outside job sites, staring at the machines he no longer owned. Others said Evan was the first to bail, packing up his things and driving west without saying goodbye. No one blamed him. The company was drowning in debt, and there was no one left to throw it a rope. For weeks, I tried to ignore it. I told myself I had work to do, bridges to build, deadlines to meet. But part of me couldn't rest, not yet. There was one last thing I needed to face. Late one evening, after the crew had gone home, I drove to the industrial park where it all began. The old Bennett Construction office sat at the end of the row, its windows dark, the once blue sign faded to gray. I parked outside and just stared at it for a while. The front door was unlocked. Inside, the air was heavy with dust and silence. The desks were bare, papers scattered like ghosts of work left unfinished. The smell of old wood and coffee lingered faintly, pulling me back to years I'd tried to bury. I walked through the empty rooms, fingers brushing over file cabinets and chipped counters. Everything looked smaller than I remembered, or maybe I'd just grown past it. I stopped in the main office, the one where Dad used to sit behind that big oak desk. The chair was still there, pushed back slightly, as if he'd just stepped out and never returned. For a long moment, I stood there, caught between anger and something softer. I'd thought this moment would feel like victory, but it didn't. It just felt hollow. My throat tightened as I looked around at the bare walls. All those years, all that work, gone like dust in the wind. I whispered into the stillness, barely louder than a breath. "I just wanted you to see me." A sound came from behind me, slow footsteps. I turned, startled. Dad stood in the doorway. His clothes hung loose on him, his face older than I remembered. His eyes, once sharp, looked tired, sunken. He didn't speak right away. He just stood there, trembling slightly, his hand resting on the doorframe. When he finally spoke, his voice cracked. "You built something I never could." The words hung between us, heavy and quiet. There was no bitterness left, no fight, just the hollow truth of a man who'd lost everything but pride. I didn't move closer, and he didn't either. We just stood there, surrounded by the ghosts of what used to be, a father, a daughter, and the ruins of a legacy neither of us could repair. He looked so fragile standing there, the man who once seemed unshakable. His hand slipped from the doorframe, and he staggered slightly before catching himself. Instinct took over before pride could stop me. I stepped forward and grabbed his arm, steadying him. His skin felt cold, his body lighter than I remembered. For a long time, neither of us spoke. The only sound was the creak of the old floor beneath our feet. His eyes, cloudy and red at the edges, searched my face like he was seeing me for the first time. "Sit down," I said quietly, guiding him toward the chair behind the desk. He sank into it slowly, breathing hard. The office around us was still, the air thick with years of unspoken words. He rubbed a hand over his face, the rough scrape of his beard loud in the silence. When he finally spoke, his voice trembled. "Lyra." It stopped me cold. He had never said my name like that, not gently, not with recognition. For years, it was always girl, sharp and distant, as if that word alone kept me beneath him. Hearing my name now felt strange, almost unreal. He swallowed, looking down at his hands. "You were never worthless," he said, his voice breaking on the words. "You were the only one who had worth." The confession hung in the air, heavy and raw. I wanted to feel relief or pride or even anger, but all I felt was tired. There were too many years behind us, too many things said that couldn't be unsaid. Still, for the first time, I saw him as something more than the man who had hurt me. He was just old, broken, and haunted by the weight of his own mistakes. "I don't hate you, Dad," I said quietly, "but I can't carry this anymore." He nodded, eyes glistening but dry. I think he knew that was the closest thing to forgiveness I could offer. I stood there another moment, then stepped back and looked around the empty office one last time. The faded walls, the dust, the faint smell of sawdust that still clung to everything. The first light of morning crept through the cracked blinds, painting the room in pale gold. Dust floated in the air like tiny sparks, catching the sunlight. I took a deep breath, letting the weight of the moment sink in, then turned toward the door. Behind me, his voice came again, softer this time. "I'm proud of you." I didn't turn around. I just nodded once, more to myself than to him, and walked out. Outside, the air felt cool and alive. My truck was parked at the curb, the Iron Vine contracting logo catching the early sun. I climbed in, started the engine, and glanced back at the old building. Through the window, I could see his silhouette, small, still, fading into the dim light. As I pulled onto the road, the town slowly waking around me, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: peace. Not the kind that comes from winning, but the kind that comes from finally letting go. Sometimes, the sweetest revenge isn't destroying what broke you. It's building something stronger in its place. Do you think I did the right thing by walking away and building my own life? Or should I have given them another chance? Let me know in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this.